Hey, what's up? It's me again. Well, finally I'm able to make another video now that Labor Day is over and we are in September, and I got my hair cut. I guess it doesn't really look that great right now, but eventually it'll grow out a little bit and it'll look better. So, what I'd like to talk about today is a topic that I had planned while I was at my mom's house. And I just never really got around to making this video because it takes a little bit of explaining and some show and tell, which I didn't have when I was over there. But what I'd like to talk about today is, I like to title this video The Gerbert Show. And what that is, well, it's something from a long time ago, and I think you'll understand why it gives me hope when I look back on it, and why I'm finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with this current obsession. And what I'm referring to is, of course, this show. You can type it in the search bar, Gerbert Show, 1980s. And it was just a show, like, it wasn't a cartoon, although the intro was, but it was just a silly children's show about this little Muppet boy. You see, back then, Muppets were all the rage. There was Sesame Street, and then Barney was people in costumes. And the end thing on PBS was to have children's shows where you would have puppets and or people, usually adults, dressed in costumes that would interact with actual children. Okay, that was the thing in children's television. Yes, there were cartoons, but before CGI, it was cheaper and easier to make what I've just described. And of course, it was realistic and 3D. So basically, way back, well, I mean, the show actually is just like everything else in that it may have begun, a long time before I ever found out about it. You see, I would always get into a show many years after it had been in production, and of course there were many episodes that had built up and been made over the years. Okay, and the reason I got obsessed with Gerbert is, well, my sister was basically a year and a half old. And when I think back on this obsession, it was relatively short-lived as compared to the ones that I have now that I'm older. And I was 10 years old in the fall of '93, so I guess that would make it, 28 years ago? Wow. And the fact that the date pattern is repeating itself has a lot to do with me thinking about it more than usual. You have a certain pattern of Friday the 13th from March through February, let's say, instead of December through January, and it can only be one of 7 patterns. Okay. It's only 14 different patterns because of the leap year, and of course, most of those are repeats. So anyway, there was a Friday the 13th in August of '93, just like there was this year. And of course, September and December always begin on the same weekday, no matter what year it is. So when I look back on the fall of '93, when I was 10 years old, I had this obsession with Gerbert, much the same as I was obsessed with other things. Almost every year I would get a new obsession. And I actually long for the days when my obsessions were so short-lived. And the way I would get into these things or become obsessed with them, it never ceased to amaze me how I could go from knowing absolutely nothing about a subject matter or what have you. I could go from knowing absolutely nothing about it, like not even knowing that it existed and not caring if it did, to becoming all of a sudden obsessed with it. And I liken it to a disease or a virus, coming down with an obsession, if you will. One day you can be feeling just fine, then you're exposed to a disease, and then you suddenly get sick. And then your body has to figure out how to get over it. And then it becomes a very, in my case, it's a very gradual thing. And the only thing that really got me out of an obsession was another obsession. It wasn't so much that I stopped thinking about the obsession, but that another simply took its place and took away the time that I had to devote to that obsession. That's why I can have multiple obsessions at once. Okay, so I was obsessed with this Gerbert Show. And the only reason I knew about it, just like with the Rugrats, was because my little sister was almost 9 years my junior. So she was a year and a half when I was 10. Okay, so she would watch Barney in the afternoon. And at the time, for a little while, they would play Gerbert right after Barney. Okay, now both of these shows were several years old, meaning they began in the 80s. But of course, I was just getting into them because my little sister was getting into them, or my mom would put them on for my sister. She would watch Sesame Street, Barney, and Gerbert. And then later on, she started watching Rugrats, which is how I got into that. Okay, and so I became obsessed with this Gerbert Show. It was just a silly little boy Muppet that would interact with real children. And I'll link the little intro song below. And it just became an all-consuming obsession. I went from not even knowing this little guy existed, which he had for several years, since I had been a little kid like my sister, to all of a sudden I became obsessed with him. And I would teach my little sister to say Gerbert. And it was just amazing how my mom went from thinking it was just a cute little innocent show. She actually liked it the first few times she saw it. And she just thought it was a cute little show for my sister to dance to as a baby. But then what happened was I, as a 10-year-old, started becoming more obsessed with it than she was. And I would draw Gerbert, on the back of my worksheets and, on blank sheets of paper. And I had become so obsessed with him that was pretty much all I thought about in my spare time. And I recorded the intro song on a tape ad nauseum. And I would just listen to that song over and over and over again in my earphones. And I didn't have normal interest, and I didn't have friends and all that. So I became so obsessed with him that it got to the point where you see these shoes. See, I didn't have this when I was staying with my mom, and I specifically didn't bring them. This is some Converse Chuck Taylor knockoffs, okay? And this is one of my favorite types of shoe to wear. Right here is another new pair, some low tops that I bought. Okay, they cost a lot less than Converse. But I got my very first pair of shoes like that. And of course they were knockoffs from Kmart. They were purple. And I was so obsessed with the character that I think I begged my mom to get them, or I'm not sure if I didn't pay for them with my own allowance money or something like that. But I became so obsessed with the character that it's like I wanted to have... The main thing I remember about him is that he wore red Converse shoes made for a real kid. And I wanted to wear my Gerbert shoes. And now every time, to this day, every time I see a pair of shoes like that, I think Gerbert shoes, even though they're Converse. Converse Chuck Taylors. But I was obsessed with him to the point where I wanted to wear those shoes as much as possible. It became an even bigger obsession. You would think that once they took it off, because what used to happen is Barney would play at 3:00 p.m. and then Gerbert would come on at 3:30 when Barney was over. Okay, well, in September and October, that's how I watched most of the episodes, but you would think that I would have stopped obsessing on him once they moved him to the 10 a.m. slot for the younger children that didn't go to school yet. But what ended up happening was I made my dad record it on VHS, and so I would watch it in the afternoon, late at night if I wanted to. So I just became very obsessed with that show until my mom really just cracked down on me because I was an embarrassment. You know, at Thanksgiving, I was an embarrassment to her, you know, for trying to coach my little cousins to say Gerbert. You know, they're all around the same age as my sister. And, you know, just totally embarrassing her by wanting to wear those shoes. You know, she would punish me by not letting me wear my Gerbert shoes. And as much as she wants to deny that I've ever had gender identity disorder or that I could even be gay, let alone trans, she ought to know better because she actually used it. I mean, she knew there was something different about me, but she used that as leverage against me to control my behavior, okay? So she would punish me with femininity. If I was somewhat bad behaved, she would just make me wear my ugly white Velcro shoes instead of these at age 10. And then if I was really bad, she might make me wear a dress. You know, that was the most extreme punishment. Okay, so I was obsessed with Gerbert and his shoes. At the age of 10, until another obsession took its place in the springtime, because what happened was she really cracked down on me after I embarrassed her at Thanksgiving. I mean, it was so bad to the point where one night she didn't want to take me to eat out with her and my sister and my dad and some other family members, and she left me at home with her mother, you know, just crying to her about how mean my mom could be. But you know, she would just always attack these obsessions and not the actual tendency that I had to be obsessive by nature. Okay, so eventually I got over that obsession. You know, just like the Rugrats, which that took me longer because I was older and there were more episodes. But it really does give me hope that, you know, this too shall pass. You know, every obsession eventually comes to an end. And that one was more short-lived than most others.